Welcome to episode 19 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm the VP of Research and Development at Sumer Sports. I'm joined by the CEO of Sumer Sports, Thomas Dimitroff. We've had an interesting week of NFL football. Just to reset a little bit for our listeners, today, Thomas and I are both flying to Palm Beach, Florida for a work meeting. Really excited about that. Really excited to get out of the cold that is Minnesota, although I've really enjoyed my time here. But I want to reset this. We are not recording live. We are just going, normally we'll post this. Obviously, if you're listening to it, it's already been posted. And there are, various, news coming out of Arizona with Kingsbury and Keim. There's news out of Houston yesterday with Lovie Smith. We are going to wait until our next podcast, which will probably be Thursday after we've made it back from Florida, before we go through all of these. So I just want to sort of announce that at the very beginning. Today, we're going to talk about, Thomas, your favorite position to scout, which is safeties. And I have tons of questions for you, Thomas, because I've always thought that I've been very bad at evaluating the position. So first off, welcome, and excited to talk to you about this.
Looking forward to it. It's a busy morning with all this looming over our heads. I hate thinking that I'm excited about watching what's going on in the league, because when I was in this seat, remember, as a GM, the last thing you want is people to be talking about your job and the security of your job and how well you did in your job. But that's the way it is in today's world, right? So a lot of my contemporaries around the league who are either on a hot seat or feeling some hot seat, I mean, we've talked here and there. It's been interesting. I've had a couple calls earlier on this morning, and suffice it to say, people are still nervous, even if they know that they have security, Eric, going into this year. They know that, this is a not for long league, and everyone talks about that. It's a little bit different when you're kind of at the helm. When you're at the helm, there's a lot more involved. You're thinking about your family. You're thinking about how you're going to build this team to make sure that it is built to where it needs to go as far as being a championship style team. And it's not easy. So I say this in a respectful way and not in a melodramatic way. My heart goes out to these guys because I've been there many, many times.
Yeah, for sure. And there's always like a little bit of not getting to go through what you had planned, right? There's always a little bit of upheaval. I mean, even if you stay at your own job, right? Like, you think about Houston letting Lovie Smith go. Well, now Nick Caserio, if he stays, has to, plan an entirely different course for an entirely different coach. And, that happens in sort of every industry, right? You get a change in management, or somebody leaves on your team and you have to change course. Change is inevitable. It's hard because, it oftentimes depends upon things that are outside of your control. And so on. So yeah, exactly. We think about these people today. And it is harder even at the general manager chair too, because, there are, most of the time general managers get one chance. Head coaches, you think about Lovie Smith. Like, Lovie Smith's been the head coach of 3 NFL teams. Cliff Kingsbury might get another chance at the plate as head coach somewhere. But general manager, it's one, maybe two, opportunities there. And, and they do stay longer than head coaches generally. So it's a little bit of a tit for tat there, but there's always this aspect of getting to build a team. And as you know, and we all know, and we've talked about it numerous times on the show, a lot of things that hamper team building are things that are noisy and out of their control. I mean, take the Arizona Cardinals. They probably didn't expect their quarterback to tear his knee up, this season. And so, those are just things that go into it that make it a really rough and really tumble sort of situation. So
if I might quickly too, I know we're moving to safety, but tis the season, right? I think it's worth talking a little bit more about this if you're good with it.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, I know I've said this before, and you hit the nail on the head. I mean, back in the day, you used to have 5 head coaches and 5 quarterbacks, blah, blah, blah. On top of that, in today's world, a GM is right out in front, not like it used to be, right? When the George Youngs and, Ernie, of course, you have a great deal of respect for him, and a lot of, and Ron Wolf and a lot of these guys, they did amazing things and they carried us into this world for sure. In today's world, however, when you look at the difference between a general manager and a head coach, and who's kind of out in front of everything. Both of the people are. Of course, the head coach is. But in today's world, a general manager, all of his flaws are very evident. They're not behind the curtains anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, this is an ongoing discussion. And yet, general managers are making a third, maybe a quarter, or who knows, even less than that, than a head coach. So where a head coach might be making 10, 11, 12, 13 million dollars a year, I'm talking about the top tier, you might have general managers making $3 and $4 million. Of course, in the real world, it's huge, but there's a chasm there that I don't personally believe should exist. And we can talk about it. No disrespect to coaches. I know they have a ton on their plate, but in today's world, so do the general managers. And that gap needs to narrow. I'm saying I think it needs to move more towards where the head coaches are for these GMs that are every second of their day, they're dealing with things in the media as well. So,
well, and I think that the big thing is the scrutiny is this. Well, so, and this is where we want to be. And as we build this audience here, by the way, we're almost to 3,000 Twitter followers. We're almost to 500 subscribers on YouTube. We promise you, we just had a meeting earlier today. We promise you that more content is on the way at Sumer Sports. We want to make sure that we enter this conversation at a level that is intelligent enough for you to want to come here as a unique source of information on this. The reason that general managers nowadays are more scrutinized and more in the public eye than they've ever been is because of the success of things like Over the Cap, which do a great job of helping us understand the cap. Places like Pro Football Focus, who grade players, they do a great job of grading players relative to what was there beforehand. And we'll talk today about safety play and why, as somebody who worked there for a decent amount of time, I can tell you where some of the holes are there. We at Sumer Sports, so that you're getting increased scrutiny, and hence those jobs are more high profile. And yet, and the job of head coach was more high profile 10, 15 years ago leading into this, because we had gotten that way on decision making and just like watching the games and sort of like, the job of general manager and the job of team building, the public look into those things that was behind. And now it's hit the forefront. And those people, because of the scrutiny that they're getting at, and frankly, again, like the fact that they only get maybe one or two jobs, like I do think that there's a reasonable case to be made that those people should be more highly compensated. Do you get, and so at Sumer Sports, I'm going to, hopefully you can plug this here, Thomas, you and I and the folks that write and the folks that work for Sumer Sports on the front facing side, we want to provide people with the best analysis, the most complete, the most comprehensive analysis, so that the public is more informed on these situations, and we can, our perception of the league can be as accurate as possible.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many layers to the general manager role in today's NFL, as there are, from the perspective of a head coach. And I mean, I continue to come back to that many years ago when I used to look at Arthur Blank, and I've said this before very quickly. I used to be able to say, man, it's just right here. I feel it. This is a player. You can't pull it off anymore for sure. Here's a really interesting thing. A lot of those owners and their children, some of them are younger, they are brought up exactly what you were alluding to, in being privy to a lot more information, and sites like Pro Football Focus, and now sites like Sumer Sports, and the analytics that's available to them has them at the dinner table, the proverbial dinner table, talking to their owner father, saying, look, Thomas needs to do A, B, and C, and X, Y, and Z as a general manager of the Atlanta Falcons back in my day. And his sons, albeit, 19, 20, 21, they have a firm grasp, and they're talking with their fathers a lot more than they used to. I know that sounds a little odd, but it's the reality of it. Train set is theirs. And along with the train set, their main people that are talking about the train set are the sons and daughters of some of these owners. So it's just a very, very different approach in today's world. And again, it can't be minimized, meaning there are some really intricate and interesting levels of where we're going with the building of teams. And an owner is just not listening to a general manager like they used to years before. We're like, you're the guy, here's the keys to the kingdom. It's not happening. I don't care
Yeah.
how good you are, it's not happening.
Yeah, and what would you say? I mean, the biggest impediment has got to be then, right, from your perspective. And I know we'll get to safeties in a sec, but we're letting this thing
Yeah.
roll. I think that this is this is good content in my opinion. So, like from your perspective, what is the biggest impediment? The biggest impediment has to be the fact that there are not the same internal measurements as there are external measurements, right? So, if a site like Football Outsider says Jared Goff is a top 5 quarterback because of DYAR or some metric or something like that, and you're sitting there hanging on to Jared Goff, and you know that he's not, you know about Jared Goff, right? And you want to make that decision, but your owner gets in your way. Like, is that a real struggle?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't even look at it as the owner getting in the way. Some would, especially the old school guys. I think the newer school general manager accept the fact that they're coming into a profession and a job and a role with responsibilities that are myriad, of course, like anyone would. But back in the day, you would look at the owner and you would say, "Look, I appreciate your thoughts, and I'm still going to do this. The head coach and I decided we're going to do this," and the owner would say, "Okay, that's fine. I've given you the keys of the kingdom." In today's world, that's not as accepting. I'm not saying it still doesn't happen, but it makes it a lot more complex because you have a lot more elements to clear, and I get that. But when you're trying to put together a team the way that you envision putting together the team, along with the head coach, of course, so GM and head coach, and you have not only ownership, which again, it's their right, and their group, but as well, a lot of these organizations now have 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 people in their board who have input as well. So it's no longer just the familial element of the Pittsburgh Steelers and back in the day, the Bears and the Cardinals. There are so many more people involved that that a general manager really has to navigate. So I would say to everyone, I'm not looking for people to feel sorry for a general manager. Just understand, very, very different world than 20 years ago. And some of us would love to have that situation where we had full final say of everything and it was on us. It just does not happen in the same way. I mean, look, I said earlier on, John Robinson, 7-5, gets fired from the Tennessee Titans. And John is a really, really adept player in the league, meaning he understands it all. He gets fired at that point. That is unheard of in my mind. And yet it's going in that direction a lot more. That could have been because of his relationship with Mike Vrabel. Who knows? Those two guys are really good football people. The fact that he's no longer working in the league speaks volumes to the direction of where we're going in this league. It makes it even more not for long.
Well, and to plug Sumer Sports, both on both sides of the spectrum, right? So we plan, like, I already know that there are people within the league that listen to the show on every tranche, right? So from scout to analytics director to, and we hope, to be a source of ideas for people. We hope to be a source of generating, habits of mind that are maybe different or maybe more efficient. But for our broader product at Sumer Sports, what we hope to be is a place where a general manager can increase the efficiency on some of the things that are going to take away from his ability to do his or her ability to do exactly what you're talking about, which is, and I say this respectfully, but politic with the existing problems that they have to solve, right? So there's an aspect of, like, the whole, Jason Fitzgerald, one of my favorite people in the space. He was like, look, the Darrelle Revis signing, the second Darrelle Revis signing, was the ownership wanting Darrelle Revis on the Jets, right? Well, we want to be able to, at Sumer Sports, allow you to have that as an assumption in the optimizer, right? And so you don't have to necessarily do the optimization yourself. What we want you to be able to do is have that be done for you, have the reality space in front of you, and then to be able to go to your owner and fight for what you want. But I don't necessarily know if any one general manager can do both at the same time. And so what we want to do at Sumer Sports is leverage math and leverage ingenuity and leverage our talent and this experience we have in doing these things, and allowing you to do some of the the human stuff that is inevitably a part of your job.
It's a great point, and I'll use this as a scenario as well because I think it's an interesting illustration. As head coaches and general managers are starting to pair, whether they're bringing in new of either side, a new head coach or new GM coming in together, sitting with the owner, and they are talking about how they're going to build their staff. This is vital. How they're going to build their coordinators and how they're going to build their position coaches. We've talked about this before, but I think it's important for our listeners to understand what a company like Sumer Sports can do ultimately is provide data and analytics to that general manager, to that owner, and to the head coach. Ultimately, the head coach is going to come to the table, and just so everyone knows, the head coach ultimately has final say on who is going to be a part of his staff. The owner and the GM, even though they may have final football say, rarely, if ever, are they stepping in and trumping a head coach's decision on who he wants on his staff. So it means it has to be even more intricate and more creative with how you, to your point, how you're putting forth the reasons why you as an owner and as a general manager are presenting to the head coach why you think it should be coach A, B, and C and not coach D, E, and F. And that has to do with being able to strategically present the analytics on these coaches. Let's just use coordinators, for instance, and it will present to the head coach, this isn't just a loyalty thing. This is showing not only are these people really good and potentially good matches for the organization, but they also have they have all of this data that's available that shows that they are truly successful at what they do. Too often in the past, head coaches will look first, especially first-time head coaches, they will look to their loyalists to place in their staff on their staff, and they'll overlook some of the shortcomings of these coaches. And that needs to change in the NFL. I'm adamant about that. And I think a company like Sumer can help provide that.
Yeah, I know that was always, when you and I talked, during the season between Atlanta and Sumer, the big thing was, using math to formalize essentially we just all need to be speaking the same language. And that's a problem that every business has. And that includes, every business we've been a part of where, a lot of time is taken to just get everybody on the same assumption space, and math can expedite that process so much more quickly. And so again, like I think that what we're finding out today, and again, we'll talk Thursday more about kind of the totality of the totality of what's going to happen today as far as firings and hirings and that thing. But one of the reasons we're in this position every single year is because that's really hard, and expectation setting and that kind of thing is really hard. Like the Cardinals, for example, and I don't mean to continue to pick on them, but they go 11-6 last year. They're one win away from winning a division title for the first time since 2015. And so expectations are set really high. If you actually look at the fundamentals of that team, it's probably more like an 8-win team. And you look at, the schedule that they had this year, and like, it was a pretty easy bet. Like back before I joined Sumer, I had pretty big positions on Arizona under because I just knew that the market misunderstanding of that team was pretty high. And unfortunately, that's not, it's hard to go to your owner and be like, look, like I think of like this, the Minnesota Vikings, they're 13-4. Point differentials -3, right? They've had a wonderful season, an incredibly entertaining season and all this. But if you're Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and you aren't going to your owner and being like, guys, like if you set expectations next year at 13 wins, I'm more than likely going to fall short. Then you need to have a framework for discussing these things, because otherwise that's how you get guys fired, in my opinion, is expectations are set in a weird way. And like I said, I think us at Sumer can really help with that.
Completely agree. We could talk forever.
Not unlike your 11-5 year in 08, followed by a 9-7 year in 09, right? Like the fact of the matter is those teams are very similar in strength, but outcomes change when you have a harder schedule and we have, expectations are higher and that kind of thing. And good on Atlanta for obviously sticking with you, because obviously the next year you're a 1 seed and so forth. But I'd hate to see that happen to a guy like Kwesi, for example, who had a very unexpected good season, followed by what I'm guessing would be not as good of a season next year just because of what they're up against. But that's just my 2 cents.
That's great. I look forward to talking more about it on Thursday. It's worth a real deep dive at a lot of levels, and we can continue to riff on that for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of a lot of levels, so safety is an interesting position. I don't know if you knew this, Thomas, but when I was in high school, I was a safety. I was my coach, because I was about 6'2", 200 pounds. My coach looked at me one day and said, "Eric, you have Division I size for a safety," which is his way of telling me you're slow. And so that was always funny. I decided to go the wide receiver route and then eventually tight end. But I had some experience playing the position. You were a defensive back in college as well, and you also scouted this position. The biggest mathematical mistakes I've made in my career were misevaluating the safety position. And so I come humbly to the throne of understanding the position to you, because everything I've tried so far to numerically understand the position has been bunk so far. So what do you look for when you're thinking about safety play at the NFL level?
Let me first add, and you said you scouted the safety position, just so everyone knows, everyone in the National Football League scouts every position. I know that's probably a given, but just to clear that up, what normally happens within an organization, normally in today's world, is within those area scouts or regional scouts as well, each scout gets a position that they become the expert in that position. At least that's how we did it through the Patriot paradigm and how we did it at different teams I was with. I was the one that was focusing on top of doing, scouting all the other positions, focusing on safeties. The very first time I really started focusing on safeties was with the New England Patriots, was with Bill Belichick. Was my first year coming in to be a part of the Patriot paradigm with Scott Pioli and Bill Belichick. Scott, who was a good friend of mine, said, "Look, I want to give you the safeties." And I'm thinking, wow, you're going to give me the safeties and I'm going to go head to head with Bill Belichick, because that's one of his very favorite positions. I thought, all right, let's buckle up and let's get ready. So it was a big deal, because not only were we evaluating all the other positions, but of course we were also we were in a situation where I had to really hone in on the safeties, and I had to focus on the safeties within our building very quickly. One was Lawyer Malloy. You obviously remember Lawyer Malloy, mm-hmm. right? So Lawyer Malloy held up very, very high. And I remember going a little bit toe-to-toe with Bill, if anyone can go toe-to-toe with Bill Belichick, especially in my earlier years. And I had a strong stance on Lawyer Malloy being the guy that will continue to take us into the future of the New England Patriots. And Bill had very, very different opinions. So it was a really interesting thing, basically, where he stopped me in my tracks. And I realized at that point on, I am coming to the table every time I talk about safeties with as much work in it and as much digging as I can do. And that's a big part of what sort of developed my interest in really honing in on the safety position as I moved even into my time as a general manager. That was always a pet project of mine, where I was always looking at the safeties in the corners because it was something that I felt so strongly about. So I'm sorry to protract there a little bit. My point on it is complicated position. One of the more difficult positions, quite honestly, to evaluate, and we can talk about that. This starts with back to trying to determine what that safety position is, right? And it's changed. You had mentioned in our show notes, we'd maybe love to throw it back at you first before I come back. On the show notes, things have changed drastically for the safety position, right? There were years ago where these guys were 220 pound, 6'3", 6'2", whatever, just rocking people. And that has changed a lot now, given the importance of making sure that these safeties are adept at coverage as well. I want to toss it back to you on the show notes for a minute, talk a little bit about that, and you can come back to me on some of the specifics.
Yeah, it's so hard because there are two types of safeties in my opinion, and there's one kind that are involved in a lot of plays, and then there are other kinds who are involved in very few plays. And I think this is where, for example, Pro Football Focus grades can kind of lead you astray, right? So I think when you look at like a deep safety whose responsibility is to cover the deep parts of the field, that player may only be in conflict 32 times a season, maybe twice a game, right? Because there's a deep ball to the one half of the field, or you're in space and you got to make a tackle on a running back or tight end. And from a valuation standpoint, those plays are incredibly high leverage. If you miss a tackle on a running back 15 yards into the back, like that's a touchdown. And so you miss that tackle and that's worth 6 expected points or something like that. If you fail to get over and intercept the pass, and in fact that ball gets over the top of you for a touchdown, you're bad. You look at Kirby Joseph, the safety who plays for Detroit. I know you were watching that game last night. Restore the Roar, 9-8, by the way, for the Detroit Lions. Kirby Joseph he intercepted Aaron Rodgers 3 times this year. Well, an interception roughly is worth about 4 points. A win is worth about 35 points. So he was worth a third of a win, right, on just those interceptions, which a third of the win, a win is going to put you in a high mark for wins above replacement. But like the problem is most of safety play is a lot like soccer, where if that ball even gets to your area, something's gone wrong. And so like, how do we measure influence in that? Like, I felt like, for example, with this Seattle Seahawks, no one was even challenging Earl Thomas as part of the field. So, he's going to be, so that's one type of safety. The second type of safety is I consider like a Tyrann Mathieu type, or, even I think back in like a Eugene Wilson, who's a guy you drafted, right? Where a guy who's playing in the box, he's playing deep, he's playing over the slot, and he's kind of patching all the holes on a defense. And those kind of players, in my opinion, when they have great seasons, their grades are worse in Pro Football Focus than when a deep safety has a great season, because you stack 2 or 3 interceptions and you don't have all the misses, you're going to lose slot plays. You're going to lose plays in the box, and yet you're still really valuable at that point. So that's like one place where I think safety evaluation from the analytics standpoint, vis-a-vis like Pro Football Focus or even another place, gets it wrong, because those two types of safety positions, I view the second part as more valuable, but you lose more in that position than you do in the free safety position if you're good.
So anytime anyone goes into a college setting, start with that, for instance, your college scouts and your personnel evaluators, and it's the same in free agency. When you're looking in free agency, the very first thing that we need to do is determine whether categorically one is a free safety or one is a strong safety. And basically, I think most people probably know this, the free safety is more free flowing, usually more athletic, usually faster, quick twitch, hips are more mobile. They're just more agile people, where the strong safety, again, is more of a downhill safety, light you up. We can go on, and you can start rhyming about all the different players out there that represent each. And the strong safety is usually the guy that's going to support the run more effectively, not always, but more effectively. He's going to have good range, but he won't have the same range. That's where we start off when we're evaluating, to try to figure out what bucket those two, truly fall into. And remember, over the years, back in the day, it was definitely very categorical, free and strong. Then it went to a spot, and I've been around a number of D coordinators, where it was ideally we want interchangeable safeties. In New England, we spent time doing that, and you've alluded to it. And you can talk to any defensive guy out there. Ultimately, you would love 2 guys, both, basically, 6'1", 205 to 210 pounds, who can cover really well, run really well, start really well, have the reactionary athleticism that you're looking for, can cover man, can cover zone. Like, ultimately, that's what you want. Then there's not a hole. Then you can get really, really creative with how you're going to put together your defenses. The reality is, it's just not the case. It is very difficult to do that. So you usually have to find the more athletic guy who's going to be the free. And again, and then the bigger, more support type of guy who's going to be your strong. Now back to Tyrann Mathieu and guys like that. I love those all-encompassing safeties, because they do set a major tone. They can be your stud in the backfield, and they can come up and support properly, but they can also flip in man coverage as well as zone, and have range across the top, as well as sideline to sideline. Those guys are legit studs on your defense and complete difference makers. So when we start looking at those guys, they start jumping and climbing the board quickly. When you come out of evaluating, let's just say at the University of Alabama, and you see a player that comes out of there that has top-notch athleticism. I'm talking about 7. I'm talking about very good athleticism, or even excellent 8 athleticism. Those guys, they were the guys that were the most exciting for me to think, okay, let's build off of this. Let's not only watch this guy's movement and athleticism and coverage and quick twitch and explosiveness. Let's also watch his badass ability to come up and support the run, and nut up on a runner as well as a receiver that might have some size. Man, you start thinking you have the full package there. That is something that you get really excited. And you can see that I get excited about it, because that does not come around all the time. And when it does, like, the TM and guys like Matthew, like guys like that, those are special guys to build your organization off of.
Right. And I think like the hardest part is, and back me up here, is like, so though, for one, safety is not a premium position, right? So like generally speaking, most of the models will say don't draft them high because the market rate is not that high. And so the surplus value you're getting for taking a safety high is not nearly as much as if you take a tackle or a corner or a wide receiver or a quarterback. So, but the problem is the guys that are the true unicorns, the guys like Derwin James, who can do everything, right? They can cover really well. They can play up in the box. They can play safety. So valuable, because what we talked about yesterday, or in the last show, Monday, is, and I sent you this basketball book, excerpt, because I'm sort of thinking about, there's a mathematical theorem that says essentially the probability of a product being the maximum is highest when each individual it's maximized when every individual has an equal probability. And I think about that with like, when I'm looking at a secondary, if I have a fixed number, if I have the fixed roster of secondary players, I want to engineer the roles so that every player has the same likelihood of performing his assignment, right? So what that means is, like, I want to find an assignment so difficult for Tyrann Mathieu that his likelihood of success is the same as my worst corner doing the easiest assignment. That's how you construct a secondary. And so all that's perfect, all that works, that's a great thing, right? And if you can find those guys, boom, you're winning. The problem is, in my opinion, and why it's so hard, is that safety is also a highly injured position. And you look at a guy like Derwin James, he's been out for a lot of his career with the Chargers. And so, yes, you can build a whole defensive plane around him. But when he goes down, you're so fragile, because then you've scaffolded, okay, this corner can only do so much. This other corner can only do so much. My free safety is really good if all he has to do is the middle third. But if I have to make him do any disguise or anything like that, he falls apart. That's what's so hard about this position, right?
Oh, man, you hit the nail on the head on the injury side as well, right? So we're sitting here stressing the importance of urgent athleticism and reactionary athleticism, and the Troy Palomalus of the world. Those of you who remember him, to some of the guys that we're talking about, recently that you had mentioned here. I think about those players on the field right now and how important they are, and yet the susceptibility to injury because of their weight to strength and size ratio, along with their ability to explode upon contact. You want that, and yet that very element that you want, that you desire as a team builder within that defense, is what's going to potentially be a real issue when it comes to injuries, to your point. And that is complicated. Then all of a sudden you're no longer with your stud safety, and you're playing with the third or fourth safety out there who's usually normally just contributing on your special teams. And now you have a hole, right? This comes back to what you're saying. The entire part, you get that really good corner and you get that really stud-like safety that we're talking about here today, and one gets injured or both get injured, man, you are in a completely different spot. Now your defense is obviously very, very susceptible and vulnerable, and that becomes a real drain on an organization for sure.
Conversely, though, and as a Kansas City fan, I saw the other side of this. Like, if that player stays healthy, other injuries matter less. So, in 2019, the Chiefs had Kendall Fuller, who was part of the Alex Smith trade, was very good nickel, very good slot guy. And about halfway through the season, he got injured. And Tyrann Mathieu went from being one of the two guys, 2 free guys, to being a nickel guy. And then they put Daniel Sorensen, who, Chiefs fans, he's a very limited player. But if you have, again, like I'm saying, fix the players, optimize the roles. If you give Tyrann Mathieu an incredibly hard role, you can give Daniel Sorensen a very easy one that he's able to do. And so what we saw in Kansas City was they were able to get better as a defense. And then the funny thing is not funny for him, but Juan Thornhill tore his ACL in the final week of the regular season. So there again is one of your starting secondary players. And they were just able to insert Kendall Fuller as a free safety because Mathieu was manning that nickel strong in the box guy so well. And Kendall Fuller's an outside guy. He actually had a pick six yesterday. He's a wonderful player. But he was able to play free safety enough for that team to win a Super Bowl because, again, you had your best player taking the hardest roles and all your other players. You look at Kansas City when they won the Super Bowl. One corner was Travarius Ward, a 7th-round pick. The other one was Bashaud Breeland, who was a $2 million a year street free agent. Their dime slot guy was Rashad Fenton, a 6th-round pick. And yet, again, you that investment. And so I said this actually when I was talking about Lewis Seen with Kwesi at Alpha Mensa, the guy that he drafted. And I was like, the cool thing about safety is depending upon the role you give him, he could be the most impactful player on your defense or the least important, not the least valuable, but the least important player, because those roles are just so, puzzle piecey, right? And so it makes for an interesting eval.
Well, I think always really, really good points. We haven't really touched on the non-physical side, right? I'm talking about more the mental football side. I mentioned this with linebackers. I believe it 100% with safeties as well. I'm talking football smarts. I'm not talking about book smarts. You have anticipatory elements to you that are beyond just adequate. I'm talking hopefully the very good when you're that, coveted safety. There is something special about that player that anticipates and has a real awareness of what's going on the field, whether that's in zone cover, whether that's in man cover, whether that's in run support. Remember, same thing. We can talk forever about this. What is more important in today's world? Is it the safety's ability to cover, or is it the safety's ability to support the run? I would say it's more swaying towards the ability to cover the pass, of course, but you have to be almost equally adept at being able to support appropriately, right? You need the full package in that setting, or you're going to get run over, or you're going to get passed all over. So the idea of making sure that you have a really good mental element back there in the safety position is really, really important, which is also important for your second tier safeties, because more than likely that second tier safety is going to have to step in. So you hope that you have someone who is as equally as adept mentally as your starter stud type of player, so that if he has to step in, that you can bring your team through those rocky spots. Really, really important element that I think oftentimes people think, well, I can deal with a guy out there who's got, half a brain just as long as he's rocking people. And it's just not the case. It is a frustrating situation when you have a safety back there that just doesn't pick it up. I've been around that before. We've picked up some studs. I'm talking about athletically and movement, all the stuff that I was talking about earlier, and just did not have the mental element to pick up, to anticipate, to jump on things, to pass things over, to communicate. And it is farcical in the secondary if that is your situation.
Well, and you bring it's such an interesting question. You brought up a question last week where the mentality that an edge needs versus a mentality that a corner needs, right? And I said, for corners, your losses matter more than your wins. And for edge players, your wins matter more than your losses. What I think is so interesting about safety is I think you have to melt. It's different, right? If you are Anthony Harris and you're an undrafted player out of Virginia and you're playing free safety next to Harrison Smith, your job is to not make mistakes. Your job is to cover the middle part of the field and allow Harrison. But if you're Harrison Smith, your wins matter. Whether you can come off the edge and get a quarterback on a blitz, where you can stop a running back as the 8th man in the box, whether you can pick off a pass, because whether you're the robber on a play or something like that. And so what makes safety so interesting, and now you talk about free and strong. I mean, the cool thing now is you play so many 3 safety dime now, or 3 safety nickel now, even because of how athletic some of these guys can be as a true inside guy, that for me, it's a hard position, because you might, depending upon the situation and who is in your secondary, have to have a different mentality for different positions and different roles that you play. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Well, look, I mean, in today's world, remember, there are so many really talented tight ends out there that are unbelievable athletes. The way that they move, the Pitts of the world, and God, we can just go on and on with all of these guys. Just again, being in Atlanta, and of course he got injured this year. But when you see some of these guys, you have to find a safety that can move. You're rarely are you going to find a linebacker that can man up with these guys. So you need a size enough safety and a depth enough safety that can be in a cover situation inside, not only against the tight end who's really athletic, but against some of those interior receivers that are, of course, we know we could just riff forever about who out in the league are. And so these are really, really important aspects that are asked of the safeties in today's world that weren't, in my mind, 15 or 20 years ago. So yes, it's a vital point.
And we see this. So we're about to wrap up here just because, again, this is an abbreviated episode because of our travel. But we do get a really good question from Twitter from Zach Rogers, one of our loyal listeners. He said, what is you guys' opinion on the Hamilton pick by the Ravens last year? He's an elite talent, arguably the best prospect in 2022 by some people's minds, but he dropped to 14. What is your opinion there? Because I think you just brought up a really good point. I think Hamilton falls short of who I would take in the top 10 as a safety because from a deep halves kind of perspective, I think he lacks a little bit. But you just brought up something really interesting. The Ravens have started to have success with him by putting him over the slot and putting him over the tight end. And I think like if you have that kind of eraser type player, there is some value there. I wonder though, and we got another question, and I'm going to mold these two together as we're finishing up by Cartonis. It seems like a simple answer for me, but from a positional value standpoint, what is more valuable, safety or nickel?
Okay, so let me just address that one first. I don't have a very strong opinion about where the Ravens are with their secondary as much as I'd like to say I do. I will say on the nickel side, what's more important, nickel or free? Did he say? What was the?
Well, just either safety, which I think is maybe complicates the question, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, the safety position is still to me the more important one. You need to have someone that's a swing nickel that's going to come in and again, he has to be very adept at what he does. So, but I don't think you can say that the nickel is more important than the starter. And the nickel is basically a starter as well. Mm-hmm. So I don't mean to talk out of both sides of my mouth here. I'm still staying with the safety and understanding that I'm working like hell to make sure that I have that person on our roster that can step in and be interchangeable and be able to step out and kind of back and forth, a versatility element that you want from the nickel guy. It is vital. They're both really, really important, but I give the edge to the safety.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also just think the answer to the question is either or, right? In the sense that, you have some nickels that are, like L'Jarius Sneed for the Chiefs, who I think is an inside-outside guy who, he's not their third corner, but he plays inside. If you have that kind of versatility, to me, it's just, and maybe you can expound on it, the versatility matters. The fact that Kyle Hamilton can be a above replacement level player in the deep half of the field is valuable. If you have a nickel guy that's below replacement on the outside, then he's just not as valuable because again, you can get motioned into being the outside corner or whatever. And so I just think, and maybe this is the basic tenor of this entire discussion, Thomas, which is versatility is really what pays in defensive performance, in my opinion. If you're a versatile, high caliber player on defense, you make the problem of roster building the rest of the defense so much easier.
Oh yeah, no, versatility, flexibility, agility, figuratively and literally speaking, no question. You hit the nail on the head there. And when we would go out and we would look, and I know this from my contemporaries now, versatility is a really big element that too often I think is not talked about as much. I mean, of course it's discussed within buildings, but I think out in the general public, I don't think there's as much stress on it as people understand. If you can get creative with the versatility of your secondary, man, I think you can do some really, really damaging things that would be really difficult for no matter how smart the offensive coordinators out there, because I think there are some brilliant offensive coordinators. You're able to get creative on the defensive side with versatility, man. I think it really throws a wrench.
Yeah, just to finish up, the last year's Rams were the highest team in the NFL in terms of disguising coverages pre-snap. The Dallas Cowboys, last time I checked, were tops this year. No, as play action and jet sweeps and all that stuff, deception is the name of the game on offense. But because you're allowed to dictate terms on offense, versatility doesn't matter quite as much there. If you are going to try to be deceptive on defense, the offense still is coming after you. So you need to have versatility to be able to play off of that. And that is, why Jalen Ramsey is so valuable to the Rams, why Jaron Curse is so valuable to Dallas and stuff like that. Just having that versatility because you want to be deceptive. And that just matters so much. The last thing I will say, I think the reason that versatility isn't as prized, and maybe you can expound on this, is the players who get to be versatile will often play for elite programs like Alabama, where there's a real question of, like Minkah Fitzpatrick. Was Minkah Fitzpatrick a product of being able to play with a bunch of great players? Lewis Cine, Kwesi's first pick. Was he great because he was playing with 5 other first-round picks? Or on the other side, if a player is allowed to be that versatile in college, it's maybe because the competition isn't as good. And so, again, that makes the evaluation harder. Oftentimes, the best prospects we view them as amazing because they get amazing at doing one thing. And that's a hard thing to project onto the NFL.
What a great point. I was getting ready to go there. I mean, to use our sort of verbiage, Sumer Sports. I mean, there's a shiny app element to this when you look at some of these players and you're just enamored with all they bring to the table: height, weight, speed, pure athleticism, fluidity of movement, all of this great stuff. But at the core, that there are limitations, which is understandable, and yet you don't want to see that opportunity slip you by. So this comes back to what my comments were before, Eric. You have such a driving need to find that really stud corner or that really stud safety, and yet there may be someone down the line just a little bit who has the versatility that is probably best for the creation and the development of your secondary, but you get overshadowed by all of this really shiny element to some of these athletes out there. At least I have, and I've made mistakes. I've talked about that. We've talked about it. I'm not saying Dante Robinson was a mistake or Trufant was a mistake at all. I'm just saying they had me in a certain grasp because of what they offered in their workouts and their movement and all of that. But in the end, maybe didn't have the versatility that we truly could have benefited from. And that's a tough thing to balance, because you have your coaches knocking on your door every time you turn the corner saying, we need the best player that we can get here. And I will bring this back around finally, and then you can finish the deal off here. Bill Belichick has such a great understanding of taking all of what is best for that scheme. And even if that player is not the best totally in that position, he might be best for their scheme. And then in his mind, instead of going for the top 20th pick, he can go to the 3rd round and pick a guy who can situate well into their defense. And I think that's
exactly like sometimes it's the versatility that, and again, like I talk about L'Jarius Sneed, a 4th round pick. It's just like, he might not be amazing at any one thing, but he's really, really good at a lot of things. And, that just lowers the threshold for every other player on the defense. And that's really what you want in team building. Like, it's just impossible to get 11 great players. And so you need guys who can make a player seem better than he really is. And that's really important. So really cool discussion. I love doing this. We're going to get on the offensive side of the ball next week. We'll probably talk offensive line, just because I feel like that's a good spot. We might even break it up by tackles and guards, because I do know there's a distinction there. So really fun time, Thomas. I will see you in Florida soon. So for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 19 of the Sumer Sports Show.